We learned today about a whole collection of stories in and around coronavirus, including a absolute bag of nonsense that turned up today in The Age in Melbourne, which was about shame and stigma. There were barriers, racial barriers apparently, to why people who are young or culturally diverse didn't get tested for COVID last year. Seriously? Like, I know the Q-tip that they put in your nose or down your throat is white, but what's racist about COVID testing? And apparently more than 90% of Victorians at high risk of contracting coronavirus have avoided getting tested for COVID-19 when they had symptoms such as a sore throat, runny nose or a cough. Apparently, shame and stigma around contracting COVID-19 is fueling the hesitancy for people to get tested for the virus. It's particularly strong among migrant communities or young people. That's the weirdest story I read about COVID over the weekend. Meantime, apparently the United Nations says that Australia's international human rights reputation is on the line because of how we are bringing people back to the country. Fellow Epping Boys High School alum Jeffrey Robertson is among others who says that there is a serious issue with the way that Australia is dealing with this. But of course, you know and I know that it would be great if every single person who is an Australian would be able to return to this COVID-free, essentially, island and this sanctuary in a globe that still has millions of people with the virus. But of course, the state premiers won't agree to increasing the number of people who come back in because hotel quarantine is where it always goes wrong. So here's the Health Minister responding to the calls from, among others, high-profile technical Australians, but essentially former Australians, and the UN, which among others has China telling us about human rights.
Our goal is very clear, to bring as many Australians home as early as possible, and we've seen hundreds of thousands of Australians come home through the hotel quarantine system. We welcome the fact that Victoria has reopened its hotel quarantine system, and that will allow more Australians to come home earlier. New South Wales has been the backbone of it, but Queensland and Western Australia and others have all played a very significant part.
Now, there is a little bit of hope, though, which is that once eventually the vaccine can start to roll around to the people who desperately need it, that if you decide to go overseas, you'll be able to go overseas, but because you are vaccinated, you wouldn't have to come back through hotel quarantine. The only people who would end up in hotel quarantine, which we know springs a leak, and even one case results in panic from a powered mad premier somewhere, rewarded so richly by the good people of Australia over and over and over again. But there's a chance that you would be able to quarantine at home, and it mightn't be for as long as 14 days. It could just be for a few days, maybe even a couple of days once the technology starts to get better and better and treatments get better and better and we become more and more rational about that. Of course, 99% of people who have contracted COVID do not die from it. And as you heard before, the best part of what? 90% of people in Victoria who thought they may have had symptoms, they didn't bother getting a test. So how knows how many more actually have had and not really noticed it here in Australia. So the Prime Minister is openly talking about this being the way for Australians to come and go more freely.
Obviously, people have had to have their 2 vaccinations in order for them to do that. They would be able to go overseas. The proposal is come back to Australia and not have to go into hotel quarantine, but be able to do that in some form of home quarantine. Now, it's imperative for the states and territories to be very involved in that process because ultimately they would have to sign off on those arrangements because they look after public health.
So wait and see. We'll find out more about that as we know throughout the week. National Cabinet planning to meet for the first time every couple of times a week. It'll be happening. The first meeting will be tomorrow. I'll give you some more details about what that is going to be a little later in the show.